Hello, everybody. This is Dr. Ahmed Amin Nasser, your biology educator, and today we are going to talk about lipids. Lipids are different structures which, in common, they are not soluble in water. So that's why they are called hydrophobic. They hate water, and we all had listened to something called oil and water don't mix. Okay, part of one of these structures can have a head which is hydrophilic, loves water, so and a tail which is hydrophobic, so it's called amphipathic. So both, it's kind of a difficult name, but it is amphipathic, denoting hydrophilic part and hydrophobic part of it. Of course, because they are lipids, they are non-polar solvents, non-polar structures. They will be soluble in non-polar solvents like benzene and acetone. The least complicated structure is fatty acid, which is kind of a backbone of hydrocarbons, carbon and two hydrogen on each side. And at the front acts acid group or carboxylic group, and at the end methyl group. That's fatty acid. And the bond between carbon atoms are usually single bond in the case of straight fatty acid. However, sometimes it becomes a double bond between two carbons. And if the two hydrogens are on one side, it's called cis fatty acid. But if the two hydrogens, one on each side of the carbon atoms, that would be trans fatty acid. And this is one of the worst fatty acids, and it is actually produced by food industry. Now, naturally, these fatty acids stack themselves in threes and attach to glycerol, or which is a sugar alcohol, and they make what we call triglycerides. And these triglycerides are kind of a source of energy in the body, and this energy is double the amount of energy in each gram per gram of carbohydrates. So it's a bigger source of energy. Not only that, but also they can be stacked and stored in the body up to 50% of the body weight in certain animals where its energy is needed, continuous supply of energy is needed. You can even ask these birds, the migrating birds, just ask them what they metabolize during all these flights where they have no access to food. So they must be have a very good store of energy, and it couldn't be carbohydrates because we all know that 1% of the body weight, more than that, it's either toxic or impossible to store carbohydrates. So it's only lipids for them. Also, if you come near to these fine, beautiful structures, they would tell you that probably their fat is just 50% of their body weight, and they have this fat in blubber just subcutaneously in order to have a very limitless energy store, and also it contains or it maintains their temperature on one side, and on the other side it makes buoyancy, so it actually helps them in the decreasing the energy needed for living in water. We agreed now that either straight fatty acid was called saturated, or unsaturated fatty acid with double bonds. If it's only one double bond, it's called monounsaturated double bond, like in omega 9 fatty acid, omega 9 or monounsaturated oleic acid, where you can have two things. First, there is a bend on the carbon, or the bend on the double bond, because there are no hydrogen on one side, so they bend on the vacant side. And also it's called omega 9 because the carbon here will come at the ninth carbon from the when you number them from the end. So it's either monounsaturated or polyunsaturated, and we have two polyunsaturated omega 6 and omega 9, which actually happen to be essential fatty acids, cannot be formed inside the body, and should be supplied with food. Now, you would find that fat which comes from plant tend to be unsaturated fatty acids, and with this bend between on the three between with this bend on the three fatty acids, so they don't stack on each others, while the saturated fatty acids comes from the animal origin, and also they kind of parallel to each other, they stack with low with high melting point, and kind of solidify into butter or margarine. And because these triglycerides and fat are water insoluble, so they are actually carried with certain protein called lipoprotein through the blood. Now, the high density lipoprotein is the protein which is taking care of that or carrying unsaturated fatty acids, and the low density lipoprotein carrying the saturated ones. And soon we'll know the good guy from the bad guy in the story of fat and blood vessels. Now, if we look at the whole fatty acids, we'll find that the most useful fatty acid to us is the monounsaturated, followed by the polyunsaturated, and then animal fat, which is saturated, and the least useful will be trans fatty acids and margarine, which is actually it's artificially produced in food industry. And nowadays, the food industry is getting away from it because of the bad side effects of the trans fatty acids. So now, if we go further to another structures called waxes, we'll find that these waxes are still the fatty acids there are straight fatty acids. It's kind of esters of fatty acid attached to a long chain of alcohol, and they are parallel to each other, so they stack over each other, and they make layers after layers, which is very strong. And also it is kind of water repelling because it's water insoluble, so it makes kind of waterproof things for the plants, or even for the little ducks. Before they go, they just wax themselves with their waxes, and so to keep waterproof and water dry inside the water. And also the beeswax is not uncommon. And finally, in humans, you have earwax in our ears. Now, phospholipids is the third structure, which is kind of deviated from the normal insolubility of water in water, because they, instead of a fatty acid, instead of the third fatty acid, that was replaced with a modified phosphate, which is a hydrophilic or polar group. So they have hydrophilic group on one side, and on the other side you have two fatty acids which are hydrophobic, so they are both hydrophilic and hydrophobic, which is called antipathic. So these phospholipids is just important in the animal kingdom because they form a cell membrane. Now, we have to notice that 65% of our body is water, so in order to keep things movable, so we should actually have something which is insoluble in water to keep our structures in place, and that is the cell membrane. And it happened to be like if phospholipids with a hydrophilic head, which is near to the water soluble or water atmosphere, water milieu, outside the cell or even inside the cell, because the two hydrophobic tails, they come and attract, it will be attracted to the other two hydrophobic tails of the second layer. So it's actually attached in a bi-layers of phospholipids with both hydrophilic ends at the outer side of the membrane or the inner side of the membrane, where it contacts with water. and that makes lipid soluble materials can go with ease through the cell membrane. So the very important things about that if you come back to the story of comparison between lipids and carbs, you find that carbs will give cell wall and shape of the animal, of the plant, and lipids will give the cell membrane and the mobility of the animal. And mobile because most of these fatty acids are unsaturated, so they make bends, and these bends will never allow them to stack and become solidified, so they will always become fluidic. And also, you can find cholesterol between these fatty acids every now and then, increasing the mobility or fluidity of the cell membrane. Now, if you put any phospholipid in water, it will micelle. It will become a micelle, where the fatty acids, hydrophobic fatty acids, will be attracted to each other's, where the phosphate groups will be on the outside, and also that happens in liposome, which is kind of artificial cells. It's kind of a cell membrane is produced artificially with inside where water soluble, and it can be a vector for many drugs in pharmaceutical industry. And also detergents play the same role. They have hydrophilic head and hydrophobic tail, and then once you just apply this detergent on greasy material, which is very difficult to be taken by water, so the hydrophobic will become attached to this lipids or grease, and then the outer side will become the hydrophilic group, so it can be easily detached in water, and cleaning is achieved by such mechanism. Now, steroids, the largest or the ring structure of steroid is very different from the previous ones. And steroid, we all know that there is some sort of a bad connotation to steroids because of the anabolic steroids, and because people are using these anabolic steroids to build up some muscles, and then it's kind of doping industry which is forbidden. However, steroid is very, very essential to our life, and the core structure of steroid is cholesterol. And again, cholesterol, you will find some people talking about bad cholesterol and good cholesterol. However, cholesterol is very, very important in cell membranes, in transport of nerve signals in the brain or the nerves. So also, cholesterol is the parent structure of many hormones and vitamin D as well. So the hormones, stress hormones like steroid hormones, stress hormones, cortisol and aldosterone from the adrenal cortex, and also the sex hormones, estrogen and testosterone. Uh, Vitamin D, or all lipid soluble vitamins, are very important factors of lipid soluble that you can stack, and you can store more and more of lipid soluble. Why you cannot store water soluble? Because they can just excrete it in urine if it goes into a higher level. But lipid soluble vitamins can increase into a toxic level, and that's unfortunate. So we have to know that in spite of being important, sometimes they go into toxic level because of having great store of lipids. Now, we can always talk about what is cholesterol, good cholesterol and bad cholesterol. All right, we talked about high density lipoprotein and low density lipoprotein. Low density lipoprotein is taking the cholesterol and triglycerides, and actually they deposit that in the blood vessels. And you can see that there is a swelling of the blood vessels here. This swelling could be increased and rupture to cause blood clot and stopping of the blood of the circulation, and that could cause severe cardiovascular or severe neurovascular strokes. So it's very important to know what is good fat and what is bad fat. So the good fat, you can increase your consumption of that good fat, but never ever go for the trans fat or the polyunsaturated fat. And you can see here what are sort of bad food that you need to avoid. At the end, we have four structures of lipids. The common things that is insoluble in water. You have the triglycerides, you have the wax. On one side, there are the longitudinal structure or straight structures. They can stack on each other's. And also you have the phospholipids, which is amphipathic. And also, finally, you have the steroid ring molecule and its derivative. Thank you so much.